Chapter 9 of The Absentee by Maria Edgeworth. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Lord Colambre had waited with great impatience for an answer to the letter of inquiry which he had written about Miss Nugent's mother. A letter from Lady Clonbrony arrived. He opened it with the greatest eagerness, passed over rheumatism, warm weather, warm bath, Buxton balls, Miss Broadhurst, your friend Sir Arthur Barrell, very assiduous. The name of Grace Nugent he found at last, and read as follows. Her mother's maiden name was St. Omar, and there was a faux pas, certainly. She was, I am told, for it was before my time, educated at a convent abroad, and there was an affair with a Captain Reynolds, a young officer, which her friends were obliged to hush up. She brought an infant to England with her, and took the name of Reynolds, but none of that family would acknowledge her, and she lived in great obscurity till your uncle Nugent saw, fell in love with her, and, knowing her whole history, married her. He adopted the child, gave her his name, and after some years the whole story was forgotten. Nothing could be more disadvantageous to Grace than to have it revived. This is the reason we kept it secret. Lord Colambre tore the letter to bits. From the perturbation which Lady Dashfort saw in his countenance, she guessed the nature of the letter which he had been reading, and for the arrival of which he had been so impatient. "It has worked," said she to herself. "Pour le coup, Philippe, je te tiens." Lord Colambre appeared this day more sensible than he had ever yet seemed to the charms of the fair Isabel. "Many a tennis ball and many a heart is caught at the rebound," said Lady Dashfort. "Isabel, now is your time." And so it was, or so perhaps it would have been, but for a circumstance which her ladyship, with all her genius for intrigue, had never taken into her consideration. Count O'Halloran came to return the visit which had been paid to him, and in the course of conversation he spoke of the officers who had been introduced to him, and told Lady Dashfort that he had heard a report which shocked him much. He hoped it could not be true, that one of these officers had introduced his mistress as his wife to Lady Oranmore, who lived in the neighbourhood. This officer, it was said, had let Lady Oranmore send her carriage for this woman, and that she had dined at Oranmore with her ladyship and her daughters. "But I cannot believe it. I cannot believe it to be possible, that any gentleman, that any officer, could do such a thing," said the count. "And is this all?" exclaimed Lady Dashfort. "Is this all the terrible affair, my good count, which has brought your face to this prodigious length?" The count looked at Lady Dashfort with astonishment. "Such a look of virtuous indignation," continued she, "did I never behold on or off the stage. Forgive me for laughing, count, but believe me, comedy goes through the world better than tragedy, and, take it all in all, does rather less mischief. As to the thing in question, I know nothing about it. I dare say it is not true, but now suppose it was. It is only a silly quiz of a raw young officer upon a prudish old dowager. I know nothing about it, for my part, but after all, what irreparable mischief has been done? Laugh at the thing, and then it is a jest, a bad one, perhaps, but still only a jest, and there's an end of it. But take it seriously, and there's no knowing where it might end, in half a dozen duels, maybe." "Of that, madam," said the count, "Lady Oranmore's prudence and presence of mind have prevented all danger. Her ladyship would not understand the insult. She said, or she acted as if she said, Je ne veux rien voir, rien écouter, rien savoir. Lady Oranmore is one of the most respectable—" "Count, I beg your pardon," interrupted Lady Dashfort, "but I must tell you that your favourite, Lady Oranmore, has behaved very ill to me, purposely omitted to invite Isabel to her ball, offended and insulted me. Her praises, therefore, cannot be the most agreeable subject of conversation you can choose for my amusement. And as to the rest, you, who have such variety and so much politeness, will, I am sure, have the goodness to indulge my caprice in this instance." "I shall obey your ladyship, and be silent, whatever pleasure it might give me to speak on that subject," said the count; "and I trust Lady Dashfort will reward me by the assurance that, however playfully she may have just now spoken, she seriously disapproves and is shocked." "Oh, shocked, shocked to death, if that will satisfy you, my dear count." The count obviously was not satisfied. He had civil as well as military courage, and his sense of right and wrong could stand against the raillery and ridicule of a fine lady. The conversation ended. Lady Dashfort thought it would have no further consequences, and she did not regret the loss of a man like Count O'Halloran, who lived retired in his castle, and who could not have any influence upon the opinion of the fashionable world. However, upon turning from the count to Lord Colambre, who she thought had been occupied with Lady Isabel, and to whom she imagined all this dispute was uninteresting, she perceived by his countenance that she had made a great mistake. Still, she trusted that her power over Lord Colambre was sufficient easily to efface whatever unfavourable impression this conversation had made upon his mind. He had no personal interest in the affair, and she had generally found that people are easily satisfied about any wrong or insult, public or private, in which they have no immediate concern. But all the charms of her conversation were now tried in vain to reclaim him from the reverie into which he had fallen. His friend Sir James Brooke's parting advice occurred to our hero. His eyes began to open to Lady Dashfort's character, and he was, from this moment, freed from her power. Lady Isabel, however, had taken no part in all this. She was blameless, and independently of her mother, and in pretended opposition of sentiment, she might have continued to retain the influence she had gained over Lord Colambre, but that a slight accident revealed to him her real disposition. It happened on the evening of this day that Lady Isabel came into the library with one of the young ladies of the house, talking very eagerly, without perceiving Lord Colambre, who was sitting in one of the recesses, reading. "My dear creature, you are quite mistaken," said Lady Isabel. "He was never a favourite of mine. I always detested him. I only flirted with him to plague his wife. Oh, that wife, my dear Elizabeth, I do hate," cried she, clasping her hands, and expressing hatred with all her soul and with all her strength. "I detest that Lady de Cresey to such a degree, that to purchase the pleasure of making her feel the pangs of jealousy for 1 hour, look, I would this moment lay down this finger and let it be cut off." The face, the whole figure of Lady Isabel at this moment appeared to Lord Colambre suddenly metamorphosed. Instead of the soft, gentle, amiable female, all sweet charity and tender sympathy, formed to love and to be loved, he beheld one possessed and convulsed by an evil spirit. Her beauty, if beauty it could be called, the beauty of a fiend. Some ejaculation which he unconsciously uttered made Lady Isabel start. She saw him, saw the expression of his countenance, and knew that all was over. Lord Colambre, to the utter astonishment and disappointment of Lady Dashfort, and to the still greater mortification of Lady Isabel, announced this night that it was necessary he should immediately pursue his tour in Ireland. We pass over all the castles in the air which the young ladies of the family had built, and which now fell to the ground. We pass all the civil speeches of Lord and Lady Kilpatrick, all the vehement remonstrances of Lady Dashfort, and the vain sighs of Lady Isabel. To the last moment Lady Dashfort said, "He will not go," but he went. and when he was gone, Lady Dashfort exclaimed, "That man has escaped from me." And after a pause, turning to her daughter, she, in the most taunting and contemptuous terms, reproached her as the cause of this failure, concluding by a declaration that she must in future manage her own affairs, and had best settle her mind to marry Heathcock, since every one else was too wise to think of her. Lady Isabel, of course, retorted, but we leave this amiable mother and daughter to recriminate in appropriate terms, and we follow our hero, rejoiced that he has been disentangled from their snares. Those who have never been in similar peril will wonder much that he did not escape sooner. Those who have ever been in like danger will wonder more that he escaped at all. Those who are best acquainted with the heart or imagination of man will be most ready to acknowledge that the combined charms of wit, beauty, and flattery may for a time suspend the action of right reason in the mind of the greatest philosopher, or operate against the resolutions of the greatest of heroes. Lord Colambre pursued his way to Castle Halloran, desirous, before he quitted this part of the country, to take leave of the count, who had shown him much civility, and for whose honourable conduct and generous character he had conceived a high esteem, which no little peculiarities of antiquated dress or manner could diminish. Indeed, the old-fashioned politeness of what was formerly called a well-bred gentleman pleased him better than the indolent or insolent selfishness of modern men of the temps. Perhaps, notwithstanding our hero's determination to turn his mind from everything connected with the idea of Miss Nugent, some latent curiosity about the burial place of the Nugents might have operated to make him call upon the count. In this hope he was disappointed, for a cross miller, to whom the abbey ground was let, on which the burial place was found, had taken it into his head to refuse admittance, and none could enter his ground. Count O'Halloran was much pleased by Lord Colambre's visit. The very day of Lord Colambre's arrival at Halloran Castle, the count was going to Oranmore. He was dressed, and his carriage was waiting. Therefore Lord Colambre begged that he might not detain him, and the count requested his lordship to accompany him. "Let me have the honour of introducing you, my lord, to a family with whom I am persuaded you will be pleased, by whom you will be appreciated, and at whose house you will have an opportunity of seeing the best manner of living of the Irish nobility." Lord Colambre accepted the invitation, and was introduced at Oranmore. The dignified appearance and respectable character of Lady Oranmore, the charming unaffected manners of her daughters, the air of domestic happiness and comfort in her family, the becoming magnificence, free from ostentation, in her whole establishment, the respect and affection with which she was treated by all who approached her, delighted and touched Lord Colambre. The more, perhaps, because he had heard this family so unjustly abused, and because he saw Lady Oranmore and her daughter in immediate contrast to Lady Dashfort and Lady Isabel. A little circumstance which occurred during this visit increased his interest for the family. When Lady de Cressy's little boys came in after dinner, one of them was playing with a seal which had just been torn from a letter. The child showed it to Lord Colambre, and asked him to read the motto. The motto was, "Deeds, not words," his friend Sir James Brooke's motto, and his arms. Lord Colambre eagerly inquired if this family was acquainted with Sir James, and he soon perceived that they were not only acquainted with him, but that they were particularly interested about him. Lady Oranmore's second daughter, Lady Harriet, appeared particularly pleased by the manner in which Lord Colambre spoke of Sir James; and the child, who had now established himself on his lordship's knee, turned round and whispered in his ear, "'Twas Aunt Harriet gave me the seal. Sir James is to be married to Aunt Harriet, and then he will be my uncle." Some of the principal gentry of this part of the country happened to dine at Oranmore one of the days Lord Colambre was there. He was surprised at the discovery that there were so many agreeable, well-informed, and well-bred people, of whom, while he was at Kilpatrickstown, he had seen nothing. He now discerned how far he had been deceived by Lady Dashfort. Both the Count and Lord and Lady Oranmore, who were warmly attached to their country, exhorted him to make himself amends for the time he had lost, by seeing with his own eyes and judging with his own understanding of the country and its own inhabitants, during the remainder of the time he was to stay in Ireland. The higher classes in most countries, they observed, were generally similar, but in the lower class he would find many characteristic differences. When he first came to Ireland, he had been very eager to go and see his father's estate, and to judge of the conduct of his agents, and the condition of his tenantry. But this eagerness had subsided, and the design had almost faded from his mind whilst under the influence of Lady Dashfort's misrepresentations. A mistake relative to some remittance from his banker in Dublin obliged him to delay his journey a few days, and during that time Lord and Lady Oranmore showed him the neat cottages, the well-attended schools in their neighbourhood. They showed him not only what could be done, but what had been done by the influence of great proprietors residing on their own estates, and encouraging the people by judicious kindness. He saw, he acknowledged the truth of this, but it did not come home to his feelings now as it would have done a little while ago. His views and plans were altered. He had looked forward to the idea of marrying and settling in Ireland, and then everything in the country was interesting to him. But since he had forbidden himself to think of a union with Miss Nugent, his mind had lost its object and its spring. He was not sufficiently calm to think of the public good. His thoughts were absorbed by his private concern. He knew, and repeated to himself, that he ought to visit his own and his father's estates, and to see the condition of his tenantry. He desired to fulfil his duties, but they ceased to appear to him easy and pleasurable, for hope and love no longer brightened his prospects. That he might see and hear more than he could as heir apparent to the estate, he sent his servant to Dublin to wait for him there. He travelled incognito, wrapped himself in a shabby greatcoat, and took the name of Evans. He arrived at a village, or, as it was called, a town, which bore the name of Colambre. He was agreeably surprised by the air of neatness and finish in the houses and in the street, which had a nicely swept paved footway. He slept at a small but excellent inn, excellent perhaps because it was small, and proportioned to the situation and business of the place. Good supper, good bed, good attendance, nothing out of repair, no things pressed into services for what they were never intended by nature or art, none of what are vulgarly called makeshifts, no chambermaid slipshod or waiter smelling of whiskey, but all tight and right, and everybody doing their own business, and doing it as if it was their everyday occupation, not as if it was done by particular desire for first or last time this season. The landlord came in at supper to inquire whether anything was wanted. Lord Colambre took this opportunity of entering into conversation with him, and asked him to whom the town belonged, and who were the proprietors of the neighbouring estates. The town belongs to an absentee lord, one Lord Clonbrony, who lives always beyond the seas in London, and never seen the town since it was a town to call a town. And does the land in the neighbourhood belong to this Lord Clonbrony? It does, sir. He's a great proprietor, but knows nothing of his property, nor of us. Never set foot among us, to my knowledge, since I was as high as the table. He might as well be a West India planter, and we negroes, for anything he knows to the contrary. has no more care nor thought about us than if he were in Jamaica or the other world. Shame for him! But there's too many to keep him in countenance." Lord Colambre asked him what wine he could have, and then inquired who managed the estate for this absentee. "Mr. Burke, sir; and I don't know why God was so kind to give so good an agent to an absentee like Lord Clonbrony, except it was for the sake of us, who is under him, and knows the blessing, and is thankful for the same." "Very good cutlets," said Lord Colambre. "I am happy to hear it, sir. They have a right to be good, for Mrs. Burke sent her own cook to teach my wife to dress cutlets." "So the agent is a good agent, is he?" "He is, thanks be to heaven; and that's what few can boast, especially when the landlord's living over the seas. We have the luck to have got a good agent over us in Mr. Burke, who is a right bred gentleman, a snug little property of his own, honestly made, with the goodwill and good wishes and respect of all." "Does he live in the neighbourhood?" "Just convenient. At the end of the town, in the house on the hill as you passed, sir, to the left, with the trees about it, all of his planting, finely grown too, for there's a blessing on all he does, and he has done a deal. There's salad, sir, if you are partial to it. Very fine lettuce. Mrs. Burke sent us the plants herself." "Excellent salad. So this Mr. Burke has done a great deal, has he? In what way?" "In every way, sir. Sure, was not it he that had improved and fostered and made the town of Colambre? No thanks to the proprietor, nor to the young man whose name it bears, neither." "Have you any porter, pray, sir?" "We have, sir, as good, I hope, as you'd drink in London, for it's the same you get there, I understand, from Cork; and I have some of my own brewing, which they say you could not tell the difference between it and Cork quality, if you'd be pleased to try. Harry, the corkscrew." The porter of his own brewing was pronounced to be extremely good, and the landlord observed it was Mr. Burke encouraged him to learn to brew, and lent him his own brewer for a time to teach him. "Your Mr. Burke, I find, is apropos to porter, apropos to salad, apropos to cutlets, apropos to everything," said Lord Colambre, smiling. "He seems to be a nonpareil of an agent. I suppose you are a great favourite of his, and you do what you please with him?" "Oh no, sir, I could not say that. Mr. Burke does not have favourites anyway; but according to my deserts, I trust I stand well enough with him, for in truth he is a right good agent." Lord Colambre still pressed for particulars. He was an Englishman and a stranger, he said, and did not exactly know what was meant in Ireland by a good agent. "Why, he is the man that will encourage the improving tenant, and show no favour or affection, but justice, which comes even to all, and does best for all in the long run. And residing always in the country, like Mr. Burke, and understanding country business, and going about continually among the tenantry, he knows when to press for the rent, and when to leave the money to lay out upon the land, and, according as they would want it, can give a tenant a help or a check properly. Then no duty work called for, no presents, nor glove money, nor sealing money even, taken or offered, no underhand hints about proposals, when land would be out of lease, but a considerable preference, if deserved, to the old tenant, and if not, a fair advertisement, and the best offer and tenant accepted. No screwing of the land to the highest penny, just to please the head landlord for the minute, and ruin him at the end by the tenants racking the land, and running off with the year's rent. Nor no bargains to his own relations or friends did Mr. Burke ever give or grant, but all fair between landlord and tenant, and that's the thing that will last, and that's what I call the good agent." Lord Colambre poured out a glass of wine, and begged the innkeeper to drink the good agent's health, in which he was heartily pledged. "I thank your honour. Mr. Burke's health, and long may he live over and amongst us. He saved me from drink and ruin, when I was once inclined to it, and made a man of me and all my family." The particulars we cannot stay to detail. This grateful man, however, took pleasure in sounding the praises of his benefactor, and in raising him in the opinion of the traveller. "As you've time, and are curious about such things, sir, perhaps you'd walk up to the school that Mrs. Burke has for the poor children, and look at the market house, and see how clean he takes a pride to keep the town, and any house in the town, from the priest to the parson's, that you'd go into, will give you the same character as I do of Mr. Burke. From the brogue to the boot, all speak the same of him, and can say no other. God for ever bless and keep him over us." Upon making further inquiries, everything the innkeeper had said was confirmed by different inhabitants of the village. Lord Colambre conversed with the shopkeepers, with the cottagers, and without making any alarming inquiries, he obtained all the information he wanted. He went to the village school, a pretty cheerful house with a neat garden and a play green, met Mrs. Burke, introduced himself to her as a traveller. The school was shown to him. It was just what it ought to be. Neither too much nor too little had been attempted. There was neither too much interference nor too little attention. Nothing for exhibition. Care to teach well, without any vain attempt to teach in a wonderfully short time. All that experience proves to be useful in both Dr. Bell's and Mr. Lancaster's modes of teaching, Mrs. Burke had adopted, leaving it to graceless zealots to fight about the rest. That no attempts at proselytism had been made, and that no illiberal distinctions had been made in this school, Lord Colambre was convinced, in the best manner possible, by seeing the children of Protestants and Catholics sitting on the same benches, learning from the same books, and speaking to one another with the same cordial familiarity. Mrs. Burke was an unaffected, sensible woman, free from all party prejudices, and, without ostentation, desirous and capable of doing good. Lord Colambre was much pleased with her, and very glad that she invited him to dinner. Mr. Burke did not come in till late, for he had been detained portioning out some meadows which were of great consequence to the inhabitants of the town. He brought home to dine with him the clergyman and the priest of the parish, both of whom he had taken successful pains to accommodate with the land which suited their respective convenience. The good terms on which they seemed to be with each other, and with him, appeared to Lord Colambre to do honour to Mr. Burke. All the favourable accounts his lordship had received of this gentleman were confirmed by what he saw and heard. After the clergyman and priest had taken leave, upon Lord Colambre's expressing some surprise mixed with satisfaction at seeing the harmony which subsisted between them, Mr. Burke assured him that this was the same in many parts of Ireland. He observed that as the suspicion of ill will never fails to produce it, so he had often found that taking it for granted that no ill will exists has the most conciliating effect. He said that to please opposite parties he used no arts, but he tried to make all his neighbours live comfortably together by making them acquainted with each other's good qualities, by giving them opportunities of meeting sociably, and from time to time of doing each other little services and good offices. Fortunately, he had so much to do, he said, that he had no time for controversy. He was a plain man, made it a rule not to meddle with speculative points, and to avoid all irritating discussions. He was not to rule the country, but to live in it, and make others live as happily as he could. Having nothing to conceal in his character, opinions, or circumstances, Mr. Burke was perfectly open and unreserved in his manner and conversation, freely answered all the traveller's inquiries, and took pains to show him everything he desired to see. Lord Colambre said he had thoughts of settling in Ireland, and declared, with truth, that he had not seen any part of the country he should like better to live in than this neighbourhood. He went over most of the estate with Mr. Burke, and had ample opportunities of convincing himself that this gentleman was indeed, as the innkeeper had described him, a right good gentleman and a right good agent. He paid Mr. Burke some just compliments on the state of the tenantry, and the neat and flourishing appearance of the town of Colambre. "What pleasure it will give the proprietor when he sees all you have done," said Lord Colambre. "Oh, sir, don't speak of it. That breaks my heart. He never has shown the least interest in anything I have done. He is quite dissatisfied with me, because I have not ruined his tenantry by forcing them to pay more than the land is worth; because I have not squeezed money from them by fining down rents; but all this, as an Englishman, sir, must be unintelligible to you. The end of the matter is, that, attached as I am to this place and the people about me, and as I hope the tenantry are to me, I fear I shall be obliged to give up the agency." "Give up the agency! How so? You must not," cried Lord Colambre, and for the moment he forgot himself; but Mr. Burke took this only for an expression of goodwill. "I must, I am afraid," continued he. "My employer, Lord Clonbrony, is displeased with me. Continual calls for money come upon me from England, and complaints of my slow remittances." "Perhaps Lord Clonbrony is in embarrassed circumstances," said Lord Colambre. "I never speak of my employer's affairs, sir," replied Mr. Burke, now for the first time assuming an air of reserve. "I beg pardon, sir, I seem to have asked an indiscreet question." Mr. Burke was silent. "Lest my reserve should give you a false impression, I will add, sir," resumed Mr. Burke, "that I really am not acquainted with the state of his lordship's affairs in general. I know only what belongs to the estate under my own management. The principal part of his lordship's property, the Clonbrony estate, is under another agent, Mr. Garraghty." "Garraghty," repeated Lord Colambre. "What sort of person is he? But I may take it for granted that it cannot fall to the lot of one and the same absentee to have two such agents as Mr. Burke." Mr. Burke bowed and seemed pleased by the compliment, which he knew he deserved, but not a word did he say of Mr. Garraghty; and Lord Colambre, afraid of betraying himself by some other indiscreet question, changed the conversation. That very night the post brought a letter to Mr. Burke from Lord Clonbrony, which Mr. Burke gave to his wife as soon as he had read it, saying, "See the reward of all my services." Mrs. Burke glanced her eye over the letter, and being extremely fond of her husband, and sensible of his deserving far different treatment, burst into indignant exclamations. "See the reward of all your services, indeed! What an unreasonable, ungrateful man! So this is the thanks for all you have done for Lord Clonbrony." "He does not know what I have done, my dear. He never has seen what I have done." "More shame for him." "He never, I suppose, looks over his accounts, or understands them." "More shame for him." "He listens to foolish reports, or misrepresentations, perhaps. He is at a distance, and cannot find out the truth." "More shame for him." "Take it quietly, my dear. We have the comfort of a good conscience. The agency may be taken from me by this lord, but the sense of having done my duty, no lord or man upon earth can give or take away." "Such a letter!" said Mrs. Burke, taking it up again. "Not even the civility to write with his own hand, only his signature to the scrawl. Looks as if it was written by a drunken man, does not it, Mr. Evans?" said she, showing the letter to Lord Colambre, who immediately recognised the writing of Sir Terence O'Fay. "It does not look like the hand of a gentleman, indeed," said Lord Colambre. "It has Lord Clonbrony's own signature, let it be what it will," said Mr. Burke, looking closely at it. "Lord Clonbrony's own writing the signature is, I am clear of that." Lord Clonbrony's son was clear of it also, but he took care not to give any opinion on that point. "Oh, pray, read it, sir, read it," said Mrs. Burke, pleased by his tone of indignation. "Read it, pray. A gentleman may write a bad hand, but no gentleman could write such a letter as that to Mr. Burke. Pray, read it, sir. you who have seen something of what Mr. Burke has done for the town of Colambre, and what he has made of the tenantry and the estate of Lord Clonbrony." Lord Colambre read, and was convinced that his father had never written or read the letter, but had signed it, trusting to Sir Terence O'Fay's having expressed his sentiments properly. "Sir, as I have no further occasion for your services, you will take notice that I hereby request you will forthwith hand over, on or before the 1st of November next, your accounts with the balance due of the hanging gale, which I understand is more than ought to be at this season, to Nicholas O'Garraghty, Esquire, College Green, Dublin, who in future will act as agent, and shall get by post immediately a power of attorney for the same, entitling him to receive and manage the Colambre as well as the Clonbrony estate. For, sir, your obedient humble servant, Clonbrony, Grosvenor Square." Though misrepresentation, caprice, or interest might have induced Lord Clonbrony to desire to change his agent, yet Lord Colambre knew that his father never could have announced his wishes in such a style; and as he returned the letter to Mrs. Burke, he repeated he was convinced that it was impossible that any nobleman could have written such a letter, that it must have been written by some inferior person, and that his lordship had signed it without reading it. "My dear, I'm sorry you showed that letter to Mr. Evans," said Mr. Burke. "I don't like to expose Lord Clonbrony. He is a well-meaning gentleman, misled by ignorant or designing people. At all events, it is not for us to expose him." "He has exposed himself," said Mrs. Burke, "and the world should know it." "He was very kind to me when I was a young man," said Mr. Burke. "We must not forget that now, because we are angry, my love." "Why, no, my love, to be sure we should not. But who could have recollected it just at this minute but yourself? And now, sir," turning to Lord Colambre, "you see what kind of a man this is. Now, is it not difficult for me to bear patiently to see him ill treated?" "Not only difficult, but impossible, I should think, madam," said Lord Colambre. "I know even I, who am a stranger, cannot help feeling for both of you, as you must see I do." "And half the world who don't know him," continued Mrs. Burke, "when they hear that Lord Clonbrony's agency is taken from him, will think perhaps that he is to blame." "No, madam," said Lord Colambre, "that you need not fear. Mr. Burke may safely trust to his character. From what I have within these 2 days seen and heard, I am convinced that such is the respect he has deserved and acquired, that no blame can touch him." "Sir, I thank you," said Mrs. Burke, the tears coming into her eyes. "You can judge, you do him justice, but there are so many who don't know him, and who will decide without knowing any of the facts." "That, my dear, happens about everything, to everybody," said Mr. Burke; "but we must have patience. Time sets all judgments right, sooner or later." "But the sooner the better," said Mrs. Burke. "Mr. Evans, I hope you will be so kind, if ever you hear this business talked of." "Mr. Evans lives in Wales, my dear." "But he is travelling through Ireland, my dear, and he said he should return to Dublin, and you know, there he certainly will hear it talked of, and I hope he will do me the favour to state what he has seen and knows to be the truth." "Be assured that I will do Mr. Burke justice, as far as it is in my power," said Lord Colambre, restraining himself much, that he might not say more than became his assumed character. He took leave of this worthy family that night, and early the next morning departed. "Ah," thought he, as he drove away from this well regulated and flourishing place, "how happy I might be, settled here with such a wife as her of whom I must think no more." He pursued his way to Clonbrony, his father's other estate, which was at a considerable distance from Colambre. He was resolved to know what kind of agent Mr. Nicholas Garraghty might be, who was to supersede Mr. Burke, and by power of attorney to be immediately entitled to receive and manage the Colambre as well as the Clonbrony estate. End of chapter 9. Chapter 10 of The Absentee by Maria Edgeworth. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Towards the evening of the second day's journey, the driver of Lord Colambre's hackney chaise stopped, and, jumping off the wooden bar on which he had been seated, exclaimed, "We've come to the bad step now. The bad road's beginning upon us, please your honour." "Bad road? That is very uncommon in this country. I never saw such fine roads as you have in Ireland." "That's true, and God bless your honour that's sensible of that same. For it's not what all the foreign quality I drive have the manners to notice. God bless your honour. I heard you're a Welshman, but whether or no, I am sure you are a gentleman, anyway, Welsh or other." Notwithstanding the shabby greatcoat, the shrewd postillion perceived by our hero's language that he was a gentleman. After much dragging at the horses' heads and pushing and lifting, the carriage was got over what the postillion said was the worst part of the bad step. But as the road was not yet to say good, he continued walking beside the carriage. "It's only bad just hereabouts, and that by accident," said he, "on account of there being no gentleman resident in it, nor near, but only a bit of an under agent, a great little rogue, who gets his own turn out of the roads, and of everything else in life. I, Larry Brady, that I'm telling your honour, have a good right to know, for myself and my father, and my brother Pat Brady, the wheelwright, had once a farm under him, but was ruined, horse and foot, all along with him, and cast out, and my brother forced to fly the country, and is now working in some coachmaker's yard in London. Banished he is. And here am I, forced to be what I am, and now that I'm reduced to drive a hack, the agent's a curse to me still, with these bad roads, killing my horses and wheels, and a shame to the country, which I think more of. Bad luck to him." "I know your brother. He lives with Mr. Mordecai in Longacre, in London." "Oh, God bless you for that." They came at this time within view of a range of about 24 men and boys, sitting astride on 24 heaps of broken stones on each side of the road. They were all armed with hammers, with which they began to pound with great diligence and noise as soon as they saw the carriage. The chaise passed between these batteries, the stones flying on all sides. "How are you, Jem? How are you, Phil?" said Larry. "But hold your hand, can't ye, while I stop and get the stones out of the horses' feet. So you're making up the rent, are you, for St. Dennis?" "Whoosh," said one of the pounders, coming close to the postillion, and pointing his thumb back towards the chaise. "Who have you in it?" "Oh, you need not scruple. He's a very honest man. He's only a man from North Wales, one Mr. Evans, an innocent gentleman, that's sent over to travel up and down the country to find is there any copper mines in it." "How do you know, Larry?" "Because I know very well, from one that was told, and I seen him tax the man of the King's Head with the copper half crown at first sight, which was only lead to look at, you'd think, to them that was not skilful in copper. So lend me a knife till I cut a linchpin out of the hedge, for this one won't go far." Whilst Larry was making the linchpin, all scruple being removed, his question about St. Dennis and the rent was answered. "Ay, it's the rent, sure enough, we're pounding out for him. For he sent the driver round last night was 8 days, to warn us old Nick would be down a Monday, to take a sweep among us; and there's only 6 clear days, Saturday night, before the assizes, sure. So we must see and get it finished, anyway, to clear the presentment again the swearing day; for he and Paddy Hart is the overseers themselves, and Paddy is to swear to it." "St. Dennis, is it? Then you've one great comfort and security, that he won't be particular about the swearing; for since ever he had his head on his shoulders, an oath never stuck in St. Dennis's throat more than in his own brother, old Nick's." "His head upon his shoulders," repeated Lord Colambre. "Pray, did you ever hear that St. Dennis's head was off his shoulders?" "It never was, plase your honour, to my knowledge." "Did you never among your saints hear of St. Dennis carrying his head in his hand?" said Lord Colambre. "The raal saint," said the postillion, suddenly changing his tone and looking shocked. "Oh, don't be talking that way of the saints, plaise your honour." "Then of what St. Dennis were you talking just now? Whom do you mean by St. Dennis, and whom do you call Old Nick?" "Old Nick," answered the postillion, coming close to the side of the carriage, and whispering, "Old Nick, plaise your honour, is our nickname for one Nicholas Garraghty, Esquire, of College Green, Dublin, and St. Dennis is his brother Dennis, who is old Nick's brother in all things, and would fain be a saint, only he is a sinner. He lives just by here, in the country, under agent to Lord Clonbrony, as old Nick is upper agent. It's only a joke among the people that are not fond of them at all. Lord Clonbrony himself is a very good gentleman, if he was not an absentee, resident in London, leaving us and everything to the likes of them." Lord Colambre listened with all possible composure and attention, but the postillion having now made his linchpin of wood and fixed himself, he mounted his bar and drove on, saying to Lord Colambre, as he looked at the road makers, "Poor cratures, they couldn't keep their cattle out of pound, or themselves out of jail, but by making this road." "Is road making, then, a very profitable business? Have road makers higher wages than other men in this part of the country?" "It is, and it is not. They have, and they have not, plaise your honour." "I don't understand you." "No, because you're an Englishman, that is, a Welshman, I beg your honour's pardon. But I'll tell you how that is, and I'll go slow over these broken stones, for I can't go fast. It is where there's no gentlemen over these under agents, as here, they do as they plaise; and when they have set the land they get raisonable from the head landlords, the poor cratures at a rack rent, that they can't live and pay the rent, they say—" "Who says?" "Them under agents, that have no conscience at all. Not all, but some, like Dennis, says he, 'I'll get you a road to make up the rent.' That is, please your honour, the agent gets them a presentment for so many purchase of road from the grand jury at twice the price that would make the road. And tenants are, by this means, as they take the road by contract, at the price given by the county, able to pay all they get by the job, over and above potatoes and salt, back again to the agent for the arrear on the land. Do I make your honour sensible?" "You make me much more sensible than I ever was before," said Lord Colambre. "But is not this cheating the county?" "Well, and suppose," replied Larry, "is not it all for my good, and yours too, plaise your honour?" said Larry, looking very shrewdly. "My good!" said Lord Colambre, startled. "What have I to do with it?" "Haven't you to do with the roads as well as me, when you're travelling upon them, plaise your honour? And sure, they'd never be got made at all, if they weren't made this ways; and it's the best way in the wide world, and the finest roads we have. And when the rael gentleman's resident in the country, there's no jobbing can be, because they're then the leading men on the grand jury, and these journeymen gentlemen are then kept in order, and all's right." Lord Colambre was much surprised at Larry's knowledge of the manner in which country business is managed, as well as by his shrewd good sense. He did not know that this is not uncommon in his rank of life in Ireland. Whilst Larry was speaking, Lord Colambre was looking from side to side at the desolation of the prospect. "So this is Lord Clonbrony's estate, is it?" "Ay, all you see, and as far and farther than you can see. My Lord Clonbrony wrote and ordered plantations here, time back, and enough was paid to labourers for ditching and planting. And what next? Why, what did the under agent do but let the goats in through gaps, left a purpose, to bark the trees, and then the trees was all banished. And next, the cattle was let in trespassing, and winked at, till the land was all poached, and then the land was waste, and cried down, and St. Dennis wrote up to Dublin to old Nick, and he over to the landlord, how none would take it, or bid anything at all for it. So then it fell to him a cheap bargain. Oh, the tricks of them! Who knows him if I don't?" Presently Lord Colambre's attention was roused again by seeing a man running, as if for his life, across a bog near the roadside. He leaped over the ditch, and was upon the road in an instant. He seemed startled at first at the sight of the carriage, but, looking at the postillion, Larry nodded, and he smiled and said, "All's safe." "Pray, my good friend, may I ask what that is you have on your shoulder?" said Lord Colambre. "Plase your honour, it is only a private still, which I've just caught out yonder in the bog, and I'm carrying it in with all speed to the gauger to make a discovery, that the gentleman may benefit by the reward. I expect he'll make me a compliment." "Get up behind, and I'll give you a lift," said the postillion. "Thank you kindly, but better my legs," said the man, and turning down a lane, off he ran again as fast as possible. "Expect he'll make me a compliment?" repeated Lord Colambre, "to make a discovery?" "Ay, plase your honour, for the law is," said Larry, "that if an unlawful still, that is, a still without licence for whisky, is found, half the benefit of the fine that's put upon the parish goes to him that made the discovery. That's what that man is after, for he's an informer." "I should not have thought, from what I see of you," said Lord Colambre, smiling, "that you, Larry, would have offered an informer a lift." "Oh, plase your honour," said Larry, smiling archly, "would not I give the laws a lift when in my power?" Scarcely had he uttered these words, and scarcely was the informer out of sight, when across the same bog and over the ditch came another man, a half kind of gentleman, with a red silk handkerchief about his neck, and a silver-handled whip in his hand. "Did you see any man pass the road, friend?" said he to the postillion. "Oh, who would I see, or why would I tell?" replied Larry, in a sulky tone. "Come, come, be smart," said the man with the silver whip, offering to put half a crown into the postillion's hand. "Point me which way he took." "I'll have none of your silver, don't touch me with it," said Larry; "but if you'll take my advice, you'll strike across back and follow the fields out to Killergenesaby." The exciseman set out again immediately in an opposite direction to that which the man who carried the still had taken. Lord Colambre now perceived that the pretended informer had been running off to conceal a still of his own. "The gauger, plase your honour," said Larry, looking back at Lord Colambre, "the gauger is a still hunting." "And you put him on a wrong scent," said Lord Colambre. "Sure, I told him no lie. I only said, if you'll take my advice; and why was he such a fool as to take my advice, when I wouldn't take his fee?" "So this is the way, Larry, you give a lift to the laws?" "If the laws would give a lift to me, plase your honour, maybe I'd do as much by them. But it's only these revenue laws I mean, for I never to my knowledge broke another commandment. But it's what no honest poor man among his neighbours would scruple to take, a glass of potheen." "A glass of what, in the name of heaven?" said Lord Colambre. "Potheen, plase your honour, because it's the little whisky that's made in the private still, or pot; and sheen, because it's a fond word for whatsoever we like, and for what we have little of, and would make much of. After taking the glass of it, no man could go and inform to ruin the cratures, for they all shelter on that estate under favour of them that go shares and make rent of 'em. But I'd never inform again' them. And after all, if the truth was known, and my Lord Clonbrony should be informed against and presented, for it's his neglect is the bottom of the nuisance." "I find all the blame is thrown upon this poor Lord Clonbrony," said Lord Colambre. "Because he is absent," said Larry. "It would not be so was he present. But your honour was talking to me about the laws. Your honour's a stranger in this country, and astray about them things. Sure, why would I mind the laws about whisky more than the quality, or the judge on the bench?" "What do you mean?" "Why, was not I present in the courthouse myself, when the judge on the bench, judging a still, and across the court came in one with a sly jug of potheen for the judge himself, who prefarred it, when the right thing, to claret, And when I seen that, by the laws, a man might talk himself dumb to me after again pot sheen, or in favour of the revenue or revenue officers, and there they may go on with their gaugers and their surveyors and their supervisors and their watchin' officers and their coursin' officers, setting them one after another, or one over the head of another, or what way they will. We can baffle and laugh at 'em. Didn't I know, next door to our inn last year, 10 watchin' officers set upon one distiller, and he was too cunning for them, and it will always be so, while ever the people think it no sin. No, till then, not all their dockets and permits signify a rush or a turf, and the gauging rod even, who fears it? They may spare that rod, for it will never mend the child. How much longer Larry's dissertation on the distillery laws would have continued, had not his ideas been interrupted, we cannot guess. But he saw he was coming to a town, and he gathered up the reins and plied the whip, ambitious to make a figure in the eyes of its inhabitants. This town consisted of one row of miserable huts, sunk beneath the side of the road, the mud walls crooked in every direction, some of them opening in wide cracks or zigzag fissures from top to bottom, as if there had just been an earthquake. All the roofs sunk in various places, thatch off or overgrown with grass, no chimneys, the smoke making its way through a hole in the roof or rising in clouds from the top of the open door, dunghills before the doors, and green standing puddles, squalid children, with scarcely rags to cover them, gazing at the carriage. Nugent's town, said the postillion, once a snug place, when my Lady Clonbrony was at home to whitewash it, and the like. As they drove by, some men and women put their heads through the smoke out of the cabins, pale women with long black or yellow locks, men with countenances and figures bereft of hope and energy. "Wretched, wretched people," said Lord Colambre. "Then it's not their fault neither," said Larry, "for my own uncle's one of them, and as thriving and hard a working man as could be in all Ireland he was, afore he was tramped under foot, and his heart broke. I was at his funeral this time last year, and for it, may the agent's own heart, if he has any, burn—" Lord Colambre interrupted this denunciation by touching Larry's shoulder, and asking some question, which, as Larry did not distinctly comprehend, he pulled up the reins, and the various noises of the vehicle stopped suddenly. "I did not hear well, please your honour." "What are those people?" pointing to a man and woman, curious figures, who had come out of a cabin, the door of which the woman, who came out last, locked, and, carefully hiding the key in the thatch, turned her back upon the man, and they walked away in different directions, the woman bending under a huge bundle on her back, covered by a yellow petticoat turned over her shoulders. From the top of this bundle the head of an infant appeared. A little boy, almost naked, followed her with a kettle, and 2 girls, one of whom could but just walk, held her hand and clung to her ragged petticoat, forming altogether a complete group of beggars. The woman stopped and looked back after the man. The man was a Spanish-looking figure with grey hair. A wallet hung at the end of a stick over one shoulder, a reaping hook in the other hand. He walked off stoutly, without ever casting a look behind him. "A kind harvest to you, John Dolan," cried the postillion, "and success to ye, Winnie, with the quality. There's a luck penny for the child to begin with," added he, throwing the child a penny. "Your honour, they're only poor cratures going up the country to beg, while the man goes over to reap the harvest in England. Nor this would not be, neither, if the Lord was in it to give him employ. That man, now, was a good and willing slave in his day. I mind him working with myself in the shrubberies at Clonbrony Castle when I was a boy. But I'll not be detaining your honour, now the road's better." The postillion drove on at a good rate for some time, till he came to a piece of the road freshly covered with broken stones, where he was obliged again to go slowly. They overtook a string of cars on which were piled up high beds, tables, chairs, trunks, boxes, bandboxes. "How are you, Finnecan? You've fine loading there. From Dublin, are you?" "From Bray." "And what news?" "Great news and bad, for old Nick, or some belonging to him, thanks be to heaven, for myself hates him." "What's happened him?" "His sister's husband that's failed, the great grocer that was, the man that had the wife that owed the fine house near Bray, that they got that time the Parliament flitted, and that I seen in her carriage flaming. Well, it's all out, they're all done up." "Tut, is that all? Then they'll thrive and set up again grander than ever, I'll engage. Have not they old Nick for an attorney at their back? A good warrant." "Oh, trust him for that. He won't go security nor pay a farthing for his shishter, nor wouldn't was she his father. I heard him telling her so, which I could not have done in his place at that time, and she crying as if her heart would break, and I standing by in the parlour." "The nigger! And did he speak that way, and you by?" "Ay, did he, and said, 'Mrs. Rafferty,' says he, 'it's all your own fault. You're an extravagant fool, and ever was, and I wash my hands of you.' That was the word he spoke. And she answered and said, 'And mayn't I send the beds and blankets,' said she, 'and what I can by the cars, out of the way of the creditors, to Clonbrony Castle, and won't you let me hide there from the shame till the bustle's over?' 'You may do that,' says he, 'for what I care, but remember,' says he, 'that I've the first claim to them goods.' And that's all he would grant. So they are coming down all a Monday, them are her bandboxes and all, to settle it. And faith, it was a pity of her, to hear her sobbing, and to see her own brother speak and look so hard, and she a lady." "Sure, she's not a lady born, no more than himself," said Larry, "but that's no excuse for him. His heart's as hard as that stone," said Larry. "And my own people knew that long ago, and now his own know it. And what right have we to complain, since he's as bad to his own flesh and blood as to us?" With this consolation, and with a Godspeed you given to the carman, Larry was driving off, but the carman called to him, and pointed to a house at the corner of which, on a high pole, was swinging an iron sign of 3 horseshoes set in a crooked frame, and at the window hung an empty bottle, proclaiming whiskey within. "Well, I don't care if I do," said Larry, "for I've no other comfort left to me in life now. I beg your honour's pardon, sir, for a minute," added he, throwing the reins into the carriage to Lord Colambre as he leaped down. All remonstrance and power of lungs to reclaim him vain. He darted into the whiskey house with the carman, reappeared before Lord Colambre could accomplish getting out, remounted his seat, and taking the reins, "I thank your honour," said he, "and I'll bring you to Clonbrony before it's pitch dark yet, though it's nightfall, and that's 4 good miles; but a spur in the head is worth 2 in the heel." Larry, to demonstrate the truth of his favourite axiom, drove off at such a furious rate over great stones left in the middle of the road by carmen, who had been driving in the gudgeons of their axle-trees to hinder them from lacing, that Lord Colambre thought life and limb in imminent danger; and feeling that, at all events, the jolting and bumping was past endurance, he had recourse to Larry's shoulder, and shook and pulled, and called to him to go slower, but in vain. At last the wheel struck full against a heap of stones at a turn of the road, the wooden linchpin came off, and the chaise was overset. Lord Colambre was a little bruised, but glad to escape without fractured bones. "I beg your honour's pardon," said Larry, completely sobered. "I'm as glad as the best pair of boots ever I see, to see your honour nothing the worse for it. It was the linchpin, and them barrows of loose stones, that ought to be fined anyway, if there was any justice in the country." "The pole is broke. How are we to get on?" said Lord Colambre. "Murder, murder! and no smith nearer than Clonbrony, nor rope even. It's a folly to talk. We can't get to Clonbrony, nor stir a step backward or forward the night." "What then? Do you mean to leave me all night in the middle of the road?" cried Lord Colambre, quite exasperated. "Is it me, please your honour? I would not use any gentleman so ill, barrin I could do no other," replied the postillion, coolly. Then, leaping across the ditch, or, as he called it, the gripe of the ditch, he scrambled up, and while he was scrambling, said, "If your honour will lend me your hand till I pull you up the back of the ditch, the horses will stand while we go. I'll find you as pretty a lodging for the night, with a widow of a brother of my shister's husband that was, as ever you slept in your life. For old Nick or St. Dennis has not found him out yet, and your honour will be, no compare, snugger than the inn at Clonbrony, which has no roof, the devil a stick. But where will I get your honour's hand, for it's coming on so dark, I can't see rightly. There, you're up now safe. Yonder candle's the house." "Go and ask whether they can give us a night's lodging." "Is it ask, when I see the light? Sure they'd be proud to give the traveller all the beds in the house, let alone one. Take care of the potato furrows, that's all, and follow me straight. I'll go on to meet the dog, who knows me, and might be strange to your honour." "Kindly welcome," were the first words Lord Colambre heard when he approached the cottage, and kindly welcome was in the sound of the voice and in the countenance of the old woman who came out, shading her rush candle from the wind, and holding it so as to light the path. When he entered the cottage, he saw a cheerful fire and a neat, pretty young woman making it blaze. She curtsied, put her spinning wheel out of the way, set a stool by the fire for the stranger, and repeating, in a very low tone of voice, "Kindly welcome," retired. "Put down some eggs, dear, there's plenty in the bowl," said the old woman, calling to her. "I'll do the bacon. Was not we lucky to be up? The boy's gone to bed, but waken him," said she, turning to the postillion, "and he'll help you with the shay. And put your horses in the bier for the night." No, Larry chose to go on to Clonbrony with the horses, that he might get the chaise mended betimes for his honour. The table was set. Clean trenchers, hot potatoes, milk, eggs, bacon, and kindly welcome to all. "Set the salt, dear, and the butter, love. Where's your head, Grace, dear?" "Grace," repeated Lord Colambre, looking up; and, to apologise for his involuntary exclamation, he added, "Is Grace a common name in Ireland?" "I can't say, plase your honour, but it was give her by Lady Clonbrony, from a niece of her own that was her foster sister. God bless her, and a very kind lady she was to us and to all, when she was living in it. But those times are gone past," said the old woman with a sigh. The young woman sighed too, and, sitting down by the fire, began to count the notches in a little bit of stick which she held in her hand, and after she had counted them, sighed again. "But don't be sighing, Grace, now," said the old woman. "Sighs is bad sauce for the traveller's supper, and we won't be troubling him with more," added she, turning to Lord Colambre with a smile. "Is your egg done to your liking?" "Perfectly, thank you." "Then I wish it was a chicken for your sake, which it should have been, and a roast too, had we time. I wish I could see you eat another egg." "No more, thank you, my good lady. I never ate a better supper, nor received a more hospitable welcome." "Oh, the welcome is all we have to offer." "May I ask what that is?" said Lord Colambre, looking at the notched stick which the young woman held in her hand, and on which her eyes were still fixed. "It's a tally, plase your honour. Oh, you're a foreigner. It's the way the labourers do keep the account of the day's work with the overseer, the bailiff. A notch for every day the bailiff makes on his stick, and the labourer the like on his stick, to tally. And when we come to make up the account, it's by the notches we go. And there's been a mistake, and is a dispute here between our boy and the overseer, and she was counting the boy's tally that's in bed, tired, for in troth he's overworked." "Would you want anything more from me, mother?" said the girl, rising and turning her head away. "No, child, get away, for your heart's full." She went instantly. "Is the boy her brother?" said Lord Colambre. "No, he's her bachelor," said the old woman, lowering her voice. "Her bachelor?" "That is, her sweetheart. For she is not my daughter, though you heard her call me mother. The boy is my son, but I am afeard they must give it up, for they're too poor, and the times is hard, and the agent's harder than the times. There's two of them, the under and the upper, and they grind the substance of one between them, and then blow one away like chaff. But we'll not be talking of that to spoil your honour's night's rest. The room's ready, and here's the rushlight." She showed him into a very small but neat room. "What a comfortable looking bed," said Lord Colambre. "Ah, these red check curtains," said she, letting them down, "these have lasted well. They were give me by a good friend, now far away over the seas, my Lady Clonbrony, and made by the prettiest hands ever you see, her nieces, Miss Grace Nugent's, and she a little child that time. Sweet love, all gone." The old woman wiped a tear from her eye, and Lord Colambre did what he could to appear indifferent. She set down the candle and left the room. Lord Colambre went to bed, but he lay awake, revolving sweet and bitter thoughts. End of chapter 10. Chapter 11 of The Absentee by Maria Edgeworth. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The kettle was on the fire, tea things set, everything prepared for her guest by the hospitable hostess, who, thinking the gentleman would take tea to his breakfast, had sent off a gossoon by the first light to Clonbrony for an ounce of tea, a quarter of sugar, and a loaf of white bread. And there was on the little table good cream, milk, butter, eggs, all the promise of an excellent breakfast. It was a fresh morning, and there was a pleasant fire on the hearth, neatly swept up. The old woman was sitting in her chimney corner, behind a little screen of whitewashed wall, built out into the room, for the purpose of keeping those who sat at the fire from the blast of the door. There was a loophole in this wall to let the light in, just at the height of a person's head who was sitting near the chimney. The rays of the morning sun now came through it, shining across the face of the old woman as she sat knitting. Lord Colambre thought he had seldom seen a more agreeable countenance, intelligent eyes, benevolent smile, a natural expression of cheerfulness subdued by age and misfortune. "A good morrow to you, kindly sir, and I hope you got the night well. A fine day for us this Sunday morning. My Grace is gone to early prayers, so your honour will be content with an old woman to make your breakfast. Oh, let me put in plenty, or it will never be good. And if your honour takes stir about, an old hand will engage to make that to your liking, anyway. For by great happiness we have what will just answer for you of the nicest meal the miller made my Grace a compliment of last time she went to the mill." Lord Colambre observed that this miller had good taste, and his lordship paid some compliment to Grace's beauty, which the old woman received with a smile, but turned off the conversation. "Then," said she, looking out of the window, "is not that there a nice little garden the boy dug for her and me at his breakfast and dinner hours? Ah, he's a good boy, and a good warrant to work, and the good son desarves the good wife, and it's he that will make the good husband, and with my goodwill he and no other shall get her, and with her goodwill the same. And I bid 'em keep up their heart, and hope the best, for there's no use in fearing the worst till it comes." Lord Colambre wished very much to know the worst. "If you would not think a stranger impertinent for asking," said he, "and if it would not be painful to you to explain." "Oh, impertinent, your honour! It's very kind, and sure, none's a stranger to one's heart that feels for one. And for myself, I can talk of my troubles without thinking of 'em. So I'll tell you all. If the worst comes to the worst, all that is that we must quit, and give up this little snug place, and house and farm, and all, to the agent, which would be hard on us, and me a widow, when my husband did all that is done to the land; and if your honour was a judge, you could see, if you stepped out, there has been a deal done, and built the house and all. But it pleased heaven to take him. Well, he was too good for this world, and I'm satisfied. I'm not saying a word again that. I trust we shall meet in heaven, and be happy, surely. And, meantime, here's my boy, that will make me as happy as ever widow was on earth, if the agent will let him. And I can't think the agent, though they that know him best call him Old Nick, would be so wicked to take from us that which he never gave us. The good Lord himself granted us the lace. The life's dropped, and the years is out, but we had a promise of renewal in writing from the landlord. God bless him. If he was not away, he'd be a good gentleman, and we'd be happy and safe. But if you have a promise in writing of a renewal, surely you are safe, whether your landlord is absent or present. Ah, no, that makes a great differ when there's no eye or hand over the agent. I would not wish to speak or think ill of him or any man, but was he an angel, he could not know to do the tenantry justice, the way he is living always in Dublin, and coming down to the country only the receiving days, to make a sweep among us, and gather up the rents in a hurry, and he in such haste back to town. Can just stay to count over our money and give the receipts. Happy for us if we get that same. But can't expect he should have time to see or hear us, or mind our improvements, any more than listen to our complaints. Oh, there's great excuse for the gentleman, if that was any comfort for us," added she, smiling. "But if he does not live amongst you himself, has not he some under agent who lives in the country?" said Lord Colambre. "He has so." "And he should know your concerns. Does he mind them?" "He should know better. But as to minding our concerns, your honour knows," continued she, smiling again, "every one in this world must mind their own concerns, and it would be a good world if it was even so. There's a great deal in all things that don't appear at first sight. Mr. Dennis wanted Grace for a wife for his bailiff, but she would not have him, and Mr. Dennis was very sweet to her himself, but Grace is rather high with him as proper, and he has a grudge again us ever since. Yet, indeed, there," added she, after another pause, "as you say, I think we are safe, for we have that memorandum in writing, with a pencil, given under his own hand on the back of the lace, to me, by the same token when my good lord had his foot on the step of the coach going away. And I'll never forget the smile of her that got that good turn done for me, Miss Grace. And just when she was going to England and London, and young as she was, to have the thought to stop and turn to the likes of me. Oh, then, if you could see her, and know her as I did, that was the comforting angel upon earth, look and voice and heart and all. Oh, that she was here present this minute. But did you scald yourself?" said the widow to Lord Colambre. "Sure you must have scalded yourself, for you poured the kettle straight over your hand, and it's boiling. Oh dear! To think of so young a gentleman's hand shaken, so like my own." Luckily, to prevent her pursuing her observations from the hand to the face, which might have betrayed more than Lord Colambre wished she should know, her own Grace came in at this instant. "There, it's for you, safe, mother dear, the lace," said Grace, throwing a packet into her lap. The old woman lifted up her hands to heaven, with the lease between them. "Thanks be to heaven!" Grace passed on, and sunk down on the first seat she could reach. Her face flushed, and, looking much fatigued, she loosened the strings of her bonnet and cloak. "Then I'm tired." But, recollecting herself, she rose and curtsied to the gentleman. "What tired ye, dear?" "Why, after prayers we had to go, for the agent was not at prayers, nor at home for us when we called. We had to go all the way up to the castle, and there, by great good luck, we found Mr. Nick Garraghty himself, come from Dublin, and the lace in his hands, and he sealed it up that way, and handed it to me very civil. I never saw him so good, though he offered me a glass of spirits, which was not manners to a decent young woman in a morning, as Brian noticed after. Brian would not take any either, nor never does. we met Mr. Dennis and the driver coming home, and he says the rent must be paid to morrow, or instead of renewing, he'll seize and sell all. Mother dear, I would have dropped with the walk but for Brian's arm. It's a wonder, dear, what makes you so weak that used to be so strong. But if we can sell the cow for anything at all to Mr. Dennis, since his eye is set upon her, better let him have her, mother dear, and that and my yarn, which Mrs. Garrity says she'll allow me for, will make up the rent, and Brian need not talk of America. But it must be in golden guineas. The agent will take the rent no other way, and you won't get a guinea for less than 5 shillings. Well, even so, it's easy selling my new gown to one that covets it, and that will give me in exchange the price of the gold. Or, suppose that would not do, add this cloak. It's handsome, and I know a friend would be glad to take it, and I'd part with it as ready as look at it. Anything at all, sure, rather than that he should be forced to talk of emigrating, or, worse again, listing for the bounty, to save us from the cant or the jail, by going to the hospital, or his grave, maybe. Oh, mother! Oh, child, this is what makes you weak, fretting. Don't be that way. Sure, here's the lace, and that's good comfort, and the soldiers will be gone out of Clonbrony to-morrow, and then that's off your mind. And as to America, it's only talk. I won't let him. He's dutiful, and would sooner sell my dresser and down to my bed, dear, than see you sell anything of yours, love. Promise me you won't. Why didn't Brian come home all the way with you, Grace? He would have seen me home, said Grace, only that he went up a piece of the mountain for some stones or ore for the gentleman, for he had the manners to think of him this morning, though, shame for me, I had not when I come in, or I would not have told you all this, and he himself by. See, there he is, mother. Brian came in, very hot, out of breath, with his hat full of stones. Good morrow to your honour. I was in bed last night, and sorry they did not call me up to be of service. Larry was telling us this morning your honour's from Wales, and looking for mines in Ireland, and I heard talk that there was one on our mountain. Maybe you'd be curious to see, and so I brought the best I could, but I'm no judge. Nor I neither, thought Lord Colambre, but he thanked the young man, and determined to avail himself of Larry's misconception or false report, examined the stones very gravely, and said, "This promises well. Lapis caliminaris, schist, plum-pudding stone, rhomboidal, crystal, blend, Garawaki," and all the strange names he could think of, jumbling them together at a venture. "The lace, is it?" cried the young man, with joy sparkling in his eyes, as his mother held up the packet. "Then all's safe, and he's an honest man, and shame on me that could suspect he meant us wrong. Lend me the papers." He cracked the seals, and taking off the cover, "It's the lace, sure enough. Shame on me. But stay, where's the memorandum?" "It's there, sure," said his mother, "where my lord's pencil writ it. I don't read. Grace, dear, look." The young man put it into her hands, and stood without power to utter a syllable. "It's not here. It's gone. No sign of it." "Gracious heaven, that can't be," said the old woman, putting on her spectacles. "Let me see. I remember the very spot. It's taken away. It's rubbed clean out. Oh, wasn't I fool? But who could have thought he'd be the villain?" The young man seemed neither to see nor hear, but to be absorbed in thought. Grace, with her eyes fixed upon him, grew as pale as death. "He'll go. He's gone." "She's gone," cried Lord Colambre, and the mother just caught her in her arms as she was falling. "The chaise is ready, plase your honour," said Larry, coming into the room. "Death! What's here?" "Air! She's coming too," said the young man. "Take a drop of water, my own Grace." "Young man, I promise you," cried Lord Colambre, speaking in the tone of a master, striking the young man's shoulder, who was kneeling at Grace's feet; but, recollecting and restraining himself, he added, in a quiet voice, "I promise you I shall never forget the hospitality I have received in this house, and I am sorry to be obliged to leave you in distress." These words uttered with difficulty, he hurried out of the house and into his carriage. "Go back to them," said he to the postillion. "Go back and ask whether, if I should stay a day or two longer in this country, they would let me return at night and lodge with them. And here, man, stay, take this," putting money into his hands, "for the good woman of the house." The postillion went in and returned. "She won't at all. I knew she would not." "Well, I am obliged to her for the night's lodging she did give me. I have no right to expect more." "What is it? Sure, she bid me tell you, and welcome to the lodging, for, said she, he is a kind hearted gentleman. But here's the money. It's that I was telling you she would not have at all." "Thank you. Now, my good friend Larry, drive me to Clonbrony, and do not say another word, for I'm not in a talking humour." Larry nodded, mounted, and drove to Clonbrony. Clonbrony was now a melancholy scene. The houses, which had been built in a better style of architecture than usual, were in a ruinous condition. The dashing was off the walls, no glass in the windows, and many of the roofs without slates. For the stillness of the place, Lord Colambre in some measure accounted by considering that it was Sunday, therefore, of course, all the shops were shut up, and all the people at prayers. He alighted at the inn, which completely answered Larry's representation of it. Nobody to be seen but a drunken waiter, who, as well as he could articulate, informed Lord Colambre that his mistress was in her bed since Thursday was a week, the hostler at the washwoman's, and the cook at second prayers. Lord Colambre walked to the church, but the church gate was locked and broken. A calf, 2 pigs, and an ass in the churchyard, and several boys, with more of skin apparent than clothes, were playing at hustle-cap upon a tombstone, which, upon nearer observation, he saw was the monument of his own family. One of the boys came to the gate, and told Lord Colambre there was no use in going into the church, because there was no church there, nor had not been this 12 month, because there was no curate, and the parson was away always, since the Lord was at home, that is, was not at home, he nor the family. Lord Colambre returned to the inn, where, after waiting a considerable time, he gave up the point; he could not get any dinner, and in the evening he walked out again into the town. He found several alehouses, however, open, which were full of people, all of them as busy and as noisy as possible. He observed that the interest was created by an advertisement of several farms on the Clonbrony estate, to be set by Nicholas Garraghty, Esquire. He could not help smiling at his being witness, incognito, to various schemes for outwitting the agents and defrauding the landlord. But on a sudden the scene was changed. A boy ran in, crying out that St. Dennis was riding down the hill into the town, and if you would not have the licence, said the boy, take care of yourself. If you wouldn't have the licence, Lord Colambre perceived by what followed, meant if you have not a licence. Brannigan immediately snatched an untasted glass of whisky from a customer's lips, who cried murder, gave it and the bottle he held in his hand to his wife, who swallowed the spirits and ran away with the bottle and glass into some back hole, whilst the bystanders laughed, saying, "Well thought of, Peggy." "Clear out, all of you, at the back door, for the love of heaven, if you wouldn't be the ruin of me," said the man of the house, setting a ladder to a corner of the shop. "Phil, hoist me up the keg to the loft," added he, running up the ladder. "And one of ye step up street and give Rose McGivney notice, for she's selling too." The keg was hoisted up, the ladder removed, the shop cleared of all the customers, the shutters shut, the door barred, the counter cleaned. 'Lift your stones, sir, if you plase,' said the wife, as she rubbed the counter, 'and say nothing of what you seen at all, but that you're a stranger and a traveller, seeking a lodging, if you're questioned, or waiting to see Mr. Dennis. There's no smell of whisky in it, now, is there, sir?' Lord Colambre could not flatter her so far as to say this; he could only hope that no one would perceive it. 'Oh, and if he would, the smell of whisky was nothing,' as the wife affirmed, 'for it was everywhere in nature, and no proof again any one, good or bad. Now St. Dennis may come when he will, or old Nick himself.' So she tied up a blue handkerchief over her head, and had the toothache, very bad. Lord Colambre turned to look for the man of the house. 'He's safe in bed,' said the wife. 'In bed! When?' 'Whilst you turned your head, while I was tying the handkerchief over my face. Within the room. Look, he is snug.' And there he was, in bed, certainly, and his clothes on the chest. A knock, a loud knock at the door. 'St. Dennis himself.' 'Stay till I unbar the door,' said the woman, and, making a great difficulty, she let him in, groaning and saying, 'We was all done up for the night, plase your honour, and myself with the toothache very bad, and the lodger that's going to take an egg only, before he'll go into his bed. My man's in it, and asleep long ago.' With a magisterial air, though with a look of blank disappointment, Mr. Dennis Garraghty walked on, looked into the room, saw the good man of the house asleep, heard him snore, and then, returning, asked Lord Colambre who he was, and what brought him there. Our hero said he was from England, and a traveller; and now, bolder grown as a geologist, he talked of his specimens, and his hopes of finding a mine in the neighbouring mountains. Then, adopting, as well as he could, the servile tone and abject manner in which he found Mr. Dennis was to be addressed, he hoped he might get encouragement from the gentleman at the head of the estate. 'To bore, is it? Well, don't bore me about it. I can't give you any answer now, my good friend. I'm engaged.' Out he strutted. 'Stick to him up the town, if you have a mind to get your answer,' whispered the woman. Lord Colambre followed, for he wished to see the end of this scene. 'Well, sir, what are you following and sticking to me like my shadow for?' said Mr. Dennis, turning suddenly upon Lord Colambre. His lordship bowed low. 'Waiting for my answer, sir, when you are at leisure. Or may I call upon you to morrow?' 'You seem to be a civil kind of fellow; but as to boring, I don't know. If you undertake it at your own expense, I dare say there may be minerals in the ground. Well, you may call at the castle to morrow, and when my brother has done with the tenantry, I'll speak to him for you, and we'll consult together, and see what we think. It's too late to night. In Ireland, nobody speaks to a gentleman about business after dinner. Your servant, sir. Anybody can show you the way to the castle in the morning.' And, pushing by his lordship, he called to a man on the other side of the street, who had obviously been waiting for him. He went under a gateway with this man, and gave him a bag of guineas. He then called for his horse, which was brought to him by a man whom Colambre had heard declaring that he would bid for the land that was advertised; whilst another, who had the same intentions, most respectfully held St. Dennis's stirrup, whilst he mounted, without thanking either of these men. St. Dennis clapped spurs to his steed, and rode away. No thanks, indeed, were deserved, for the moment he was out of hearing, both cursed him after the manner of their country. 'Bad luck go with you, then, and may you break your neck before you get home, if it was not for the lace I'm to get, and that's paid for.' Lord Colambre followed the crowd into a public house, where a new scene presented itself to his view. The man to whom St. Dennis gave the bag of gold was now selling this very gold to the tenants, who were to pay their rent next day at the castle. The agent would take nothing but gold. The same guineas were bought and sold several times over, to the great profit of the agent, and loss of the poor tenants; for, as the rents were paid, The guineas were resold to another set, and the remittances made through bankers to the landlord, who, as the poor man who explained the transaction to Lord Colambre expressed it, gained nothing by the business, bad or good, but the ill will of the tenantry. The higgling for the price of the gold, the time lost in disputing about the goodness of the notes, among some poor tenants who could not read or write, and who were at the mercy of the man with the bag in his hand, the vexation, the useless harassing of all who were obliged to submit ultimately, Lord Colambre saw. And all this time he endured the smell of tobacco and whiskey, and of the sound of various brogues, the din of men wrangling, brawling, threatening, whining, drawling, cajoling, cursing, and every variety of wretchedness. "And is this my father's town of Clonbrony?" thought Lord Colambre. "Is this Ireland? No, it is not Ireland. Let me not, like most of those who forsake their native country, traduce it. Let me not, even to my own mind, commit the injustice of taking a speck for the whole. What I have just seen is the picture only of that to which an Irish estate and Irish tenantry may be degraded in the absence of those whose duty and interest it is to reside in Ireland, to uphold justice by example and authority, but who, neglecting this duty, commit power to bad hands and bad hearts, abandon their tenantry to oppression, and their property to ruin." It was now fine moonlight, and Lord Colambre met with a boy who said he could show him a short way across the fields to the widow O'Neill's cottage. End of chapter 11.